"I don't think I'll ever get married again." He said it like a promise, not just to others but to himself. And standing right there listening was Brad Pitt, one of the very few people who truly understood why. Because behind the charm, the humor, the effortless confidence the world saw in George Clooney, there were scars. Real ones. The kind that don't show up on camera. For years, George had convinced himself that love wasn't worth the cost. That freedom was safer than commitment. That staying alone meant staying in control. And then, everything changed. Her name was Amal Clooney. And from the moment she walked into his life, the man who swore he'd never fall again did exactly that. Brad noticed it before anyone else. The way George talked differently. The way his voice softened. The way he stopped running. "I had never seen him like that before," Brad would later admit. Because this wasn't just another relationship. This was the first time George Clooney looked like a man who was ready to risk everything. Their story felt unreal. A Hollywood icon. And a woman who didn't care about Hollywood at all. She didn't chase fame. Didn't need attention. Didn't even see him the way the world did. And maybe that's why it worked. For the first time, George wasn't George Clooney. He was just a man. Trying not to lose someone who mattered. Brad still remembers the night George called him. Late. Unexpected. "I think I've met someone." Brad laughed. "You mean someone you didn't run away from?" There was a pause. Then George said something he had never said before. "I like her too much." And in that moment, Brad knew. This was different. When George proposed in 2014, he didn't do it like a movie star. No script. No performance. Just a man on one knee waiting. For nearly 30 minutes. Not because he was dramatic, but because he was afraid. Afraid she might say no. Afraid he might lose the one thing he never believed he'd find. And when she finally said yes, everything changed. Their wedding in Venice looked like a fairy tale. Perfect smiles. Perfect moments. Perfect love. But Brad saw something deeper. He saw a man who had finally stopped pretending. A man who whispered, quietly, "I've waited a long time for you." For a while, it really was perfect. No public arguments. No scandals. No cracks anyone could see. Then life happened. Twins. Responsibility. Distance. Two careers moving at completely different speeds. Amal Clooney was fighting cases that could change the world. George Clooney was still living inside it. Flights. Time zones. Missed moments. And slowly, quietly, something began to shift. Brad didn't see a sudden collapse. He saw something worse. Silence. The kind that grows between two people, when they're no longer fully present. The missed calls. The short replies. The conversations that felt careful. One night, George said something that stayed with him. "Maybe I'm losing the most important thing in my life." Brad didn't answer right away. Then he said quietly, "You haven't lost it. Unless you let it go." From the outside, nothing looked wrong. That's how it always is. The smile stayed. The image stayed. But behind it, distance was growing. Not because of one big moment, but because of 100 small ones. And then, something else entered the story. Not loudly. Not obviously. Just enough to change everything. Brad noticed it in the smallest details. The way George would go quiet at certain names. The way his expressions shifted, just for a second. The kind of moment most people would miss. But Brad didn't, because he had felt it before. Her name was Julia Roberts. And their connection had always been there, since Ocean's 11. Since the jokes, the laughter, the effortless chemistry no one could fake. First, it was simple. Friendship. But sometimes, the strongest connections are the ones that never fully disappear. One night, sitting by the lake, George said something strange. There are some connections you can't get rid of, no matter how hard you try. At the time, Brad didn't understand. Later, he did, because it wasn't just friendship anymore. It was something deeper, something unspoken, something dangerous. Not because anything had happened, but because of what it meant. Brad started seeing it everywhere. The way George smiled a little longer. the way conversations lingered, the way silence said more than words ever could. And the hardest part? George knew it too. "I'm afraid," he once admitted. "Of what?" Brad asked. George didn't answer right away. Then quietly, "Of hurting people who don't deserve it." That was the moment everything became real. Not a scandal, not a betrayal, just a man caught between two truths, the life he built and the feelings he couldn't ignore. Because on one side, there was Amal Clooney, the woman who changed him, grounded him, gave him a reason to become more. And on the other, there was Julia Roberts, the one who understood him without effort, without explanation, without needing him to be anything more than himself. And somewhere in between was George, still smiling, still showing up, still pretending everything was fine. Brad never exposed him, never judged him, because some stories aren't meant to be told loudly. They exist in silence, in glances, in unfinished sentences, in choices no one else can make. In the end, this isn't a story about betrayal. It's about something much more complicated. About timing, about emotion, about what happens when the heart doesn't follow the life you built. And maybe that's the real truth behind it all. Not every love story breaks with noise. Some of them just quietly change. So now the question is, when someone is standing between the life they created and the feelings they never expected, what do they choose? And more importantly, what would you choose?